Well, hello there. It's great to be here with you again this afternoon. I'm Ellen Johnson. I'm the owner of Serendipity Needleworks and the founder of the Stitchers Club, and I'm going to be your host for this episode of Needlepoint TV, just like every other week. Like I said, as always, it's great to be here with you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join me today. And if you're watching as a recording, please do make sure that you leave me a note and say hello and tell me where you're watching from, because it's always great fun for me to see who's watching these videos and where in this great big wonderful world you are. So we've been, over the past several weeks, we've been talking about using decorative stitches or canvas embroidery stitches to embellish your needlepoint canvases, to take a two-dimensional painted canvas and transform it into a three-dimensional piece of fiber art using those decorative stitches and some fancy threads too. And you can also use just your basic threads, your silks and your wools and your linens and your cottons to do these decorative stitches too, and they add beautiful texture and depth and movement to your canvases. So far on the blog, we've talked about the straight stitches and the slanted stitches, and I entered a post or published a post last Thursday all about crossed stitches. Now I'm going to share my screen and show you where you can hop over and read that post. The website address is serendipityneedleworks.com, just the name of my business and then .com. And but I do want to show you where that is. So let me do that really fast. Let me share my screen. Alrighty, so you should be able to see, excuse me, y'all. You should be able to see on your screen now, this is the blog post, using crossed stitches on your needlepoint canvases. So something that I want to make sure that I definitely share with you are some tips on how to use crossed stitches on your canvases. So first of all, a crossed stitch or a cross stitch is when you have a stitch where two or more single stitches intersect to create a new stitch. So it could be a straight stitch and a slanted stitch. It could be two slanted stitches, all kinds of combinations. But a cross stitch or a crossed stitch, and that is one of the stitch families. There are 5 basic stitch families, but that's on another blog post over on the Serendipity Needleworks website. So, I encourage you to go read about that too if you haven't already read that blog post, or there's actually, I think there may be 2 of those. But that our website is just a treasure trove of information about all things needlepoint. So something, like I said, that I wanted to make sure that you know about when you're using even layered stitches. It doesn't have to just be cross stitches. Layered stitches, anytime you have more than one layer of thread on your canvas, you typically want to use a lighter weight thread than you normally would to get full coverage, because you do have those layers of thread. And if you use the same thickness of thread that you would for a single layer of stitches, what you're going to end up having happen is it's going to get kind of I don't know, globby is not really a word, I don't think, but it's going to get real bulky, and you're not going to be able to see the definition of each individual stitch that makes up the pattern or that makes up the composite or combination stitch. So you want to make sure that you use a little bit lighter weight thread. That's one thing. And let me pop over again. I've got these tips that I want to show you so that you can see those. So you can see I've got the tips here. Of course, when you're working on mono canvas, which is what most of our canvases are, that are painted canvases, typically what you want to do is you want to work each cross stitch as a unit. And this is when you're just talking about a standard cross stitch. You want to work each as a unit because it does help with canvas distortion. Now, I'm going to hop back on camera right now and just tell you that there are plenty of stitch diagrams that show you how to work a stitch pattern. And the one that I'm thinking of just off the top of my head right now is the giant oblong cross stitch. It's an oversized cross stitch, and it's worked in what's called a double running pattern or a double running path, where you work the bottom leg of the cross all the way across the row, and then you turn around and you come back and do the top leg the other direction. So you're making 2 passes on one row to execute one stitch. So that is, you're going to see that. But if you're working a standard cross stitch, and you're working on mono canvas, typically it is advisable for you to do each individual unit before moving on to the next. And that would apply to things, and you'll see this holds true. So for example, a Smyrna cross stitch, an upright cross stitch, those are going to be stitches that you would work the unit and then move on to the next one. So, and there are some examples, those diagrams are here on this blog post for you too, so we'll look at those in just a sec. But another thing that you want to make sure that you do whenever you are working on a pattern where you're using a crossed stitch, you want to make sure that the top leg of every stitch is going in the same direction. And by that I mean, I don't know if you've ever done counted cross stitch, and you work across the row and then you come back and you cross the legs. That makes it super easy for you to keep track of making sure that all the top legs are going in the same direction. What happens when you end up with your legs with it, like if you do one unit where the top leg is pointing that direction, and then you do the next unit where the top leg is pointing that direction, and then you may do 2 or 3 where they're slanting this way, and then you come back and you do one that's going that way, it ends up looking really messy. So the bottom line is you want to make sure that you have all of the top legs of each cross stitch unit going in the same direction, because it just makes everything look a lot more neat and it's more pleasing aesthetically to the eye. So that's just another tip. So there are a lot of different kinds of stitches that you can use. Something that I want to make sure that we do go over though, because this is something that and let me share my screen again. Something that we've been talking about a lot is evaluating a needlepoint canvas. And in order to do that, you have to first of all identify what the design components are on a canvas. And this is a wonderful canvas by Pepperberry Designs. It's the North Pole Elf. I love this canvas. I have this one in my stash. And so when you begin to think about choosing different stitches and threads for your canvases, it's super helpful to make a list of all the individual design components on that canvas. So what is a design component? A design component is any item on your canvas. So for example, on this one, the elf, the trees, the snowflakes, the packages, the hills that the trees are on, the hills that the elf is standing on, all of those things are design components. Now, you can get very specific, and in this case, all I did was just give you the general overview of what the basic design components are, but technically, the bow on the package, the green bow on the red package, and then you have the little Christmas balls on the Christmas trees, the elf's shoes, the elf's stockings, her dress, her mittens, the fur trim on her outfit. All of those things are design components. So those are all things that you have to take into consideration when you begin to think about choosing threads and stitches for your project. So once you've done that, and I'm going to just scroll down because you can see there is a description on the blog post on how to do that. Once you do that, the next thing you're going to want to make sure that you do is to make a list of descriptive words for each one of those design components. So for example, what does fur trim look like on, just imagine Santa's coat. What does fur trim look like? Is it fuzzy? Is it sleek? Is it soft? Is it rough? So make a list of all the words that describe those individual design components, and that will help you to begin to brainstorm the possibilities for different kinds of threads that you can use to make those textures and design components come to life on your needlepoint canvases. And it also gives you a good jumping off point to think about different stitches that you might be able to use too to create the different textures that those things would have in real life. So those are just some tips for helping you get started. There are all kinds of other things that you need to do in order to evaluate a canvas properly, and that's the kind of thing that we get into inside the Stitchers Club, and it's also the kind of thing that we're going to be getting into when I teach a workshop that I'm super excited about. I'm going to be teaching a new workshop on October the 17th, all about how to write your own stitch guides using the formula that I follow to create the stitch guides that I do for my very own projects. So if you're interested in getting information about that, you're definitely going to want to send us an email at help@serendipityneedleworks.com to get on the list to get more information about that. So I'm not going to go into any more detail about that. If you're on our email list, you will get information about that next week. And if you are not on our email list, then I invite you to join the weekly email list that that you can join over on the Serendipity Needleworks website. In fact, let me just hop over and show you quickly where you can do that, because I know that there are several people who are probably going to be interested in that. So when you go to the top, you can see that there in the navigation bar, there is a link to About. And no, wait, excuse me, it's right next door, to Connect. This is where you're going to want to click. So you click on the Connect button, and that takes you to a page where you can fill in your name and your email address. You don't have to put your name if you don't want to. I don't think it makes you do that. But you can just put your email address and then click Sign Me Up, and you'll be all set. All right. So now to get back to, didn't mean to do that. I don't need to save that. Let me go to back to our home page. So using crossed stitches on your needlepoint canvases, the very first one, I'm going to scroll down here and show you, I did include the diagram, and it is the standard cross stitch. So this is a diagram for how to do the standard cross stitch. Something that I want to make sure that everybody knows about stitch diagrams, and this is something that it didn't really occur to me until I guess it was maybe 2 weeks ago. I got a question about, how do you read a stitch diagram? So consider a stitch diagram your roadmap. And it's a roadmap for the order in which you should execute the individual stitches. And my stitch diagrams are numbered, at least to get you started with the pattern on how you should execute the stitches. I don't put the numbers on every single stitch because that would get really cluttered looking. But you can see, for example, here, you're going to come up at number 1 with your needle and thread, and then you're going to go down at number 2. So basically what you're doing is you're coming to the front with your needle and thread on the odd numbers, and you're going down to the back on the even numbers. So, and this is a perfect example of how it's very helpful to work each individual stitch unit, cross stitch unit on a row, excuse me, if you're working on a mono canvas. So you can see we go from 1 to 2, and then we drop down and go from 3 to 4. Then we jump over to the next space and work from 5 to 6 and 7 to 8. And you would continue doing that all the way across the row. All right, so the standard cross stitch is, like I said, a super handy stitch that you can use, and it would be for all kinds of applications. It's especially good for little bitty things like snowflakes or dots. For example, let me scroll back up. Like I said, I don't want to go too fast and make everybody or anybody dizzy. But when you look at this canvas, it would be a perfect spot for you to put the dots on this purple package. You could also use the cross stitch for the little dots, which are the snowflakes in the sky. So that would be another good place to use the standard cross stitch. You can also expand the standard cross stitch to, let me come back so I can see y'all. You can also expand the standard cross stitch so that it's worked over more than just one canvas intersection. So you can enlarge it and make it to be over 2. And then there are other variations, what I'm trying to say, other variations of that stitch. Again, I mentioned the giant oblong cross stitch. So that one is tall and skinny. You could flip it on its side and it would be wide and short. So there are all kinds of ways that you can adjust these different stitches. And don't think that just because it's done a certain way on a stitch diagram, that you have to do it exactly that way on your project. You can take these basic stitches, well, there are oodles and oodles and oodles of canvas embroidery stitches, but you can take, excuse me, oh goodness gracious, y'all, I'm so sorry. Got a frog in my throat this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me. So you can take a lot of those different, okay, this is going to require water. There we go. So you can take a lot of these different stitches, and you can use those and adapt them to fit the space that you have on your canvas. You can make up your own stitches. There's nothing in the world that says that you have to stick with the stitches that are in the stitch books, because I can assure you that a lot of the stitches that are in a lot of the stitch books are stitches that people made up. So, just let your imagination go wild. If you're new to doing this, then you may want to stick with the ones that are in the books. And there are some that are easier and some that are, I would say more universally used, and there are some that are essential. I would consider essential to any in needlepointers repertoire, stitch repertoire. So and that's so as you begin to practice and play around with these things, you're going the more you do, the better you're going to get at it. And my very, very best suggestion for you on testing things out is to get a doodle canvas. A doodle canvas is just a square piece of blank canvas that you can mount on stretcher bars, and then you can just practice different stitches. That's the best way to learn how to do new stitches, is to just dive in and give them a try. And on the Serendipity Needleworks website, over the course of the past couple or 3 weeks, I've already given you, I think there are at least well, now I think there are like 14 or 15 stitches that you could test. So you don't even have to have access to any stitch books. You could just go to the website, and I know there are even way more than that on other posts, but just in these past few weeks, I've shared several with you on the website, so you could test those out using different threads and just kind of get the feel for how each stitch works up, and think about some different ways that you might be able to use that on one of your canvases. So all right, so the next stitch that I shared with you is called the upright cross stitch. I love this stitch. It's a really, really, let me share the screen with you so you can see it. It's a very versatile stitch. It's really, it's just basically what it is it's a standard cross stitch that's been turned upright. And that's what it's exactly what the name says. Now you'll notice that this one is worked over 2 canvas threads instead of over just 1. So that makes this one a little bit larger. This one is a good one for a filling stitch. You can use, that means you can fill in areas if you had a geometric design on your canvas or geometric area on your canvas that you just needed to fill with a stitch. This makes a good one because it is smaller. It fits in a wide variety of spaces, so it's a very, very versatile one. And you can see by looking at this diagram too that each individual cross stitch is worked as a unit before moving on to the next one. All right, and the Smyrna Cross. This is a wonderful one. I mentioned this one earlier. This is definitely a combination stitch. It's a standard cross stitch that's been topped by an upright cross stitch. Now this is one where you are definitely going to want to make sure that you use thinner thread than you typically would, because this one has many layers. It has 4 layers because there are 4 individual stitches stacked on top of each other. So for example, if you were going to do this stitch for snowflakes on your canvas, and you had an 18 mesh canvas, instead of using, let me get back on screen so I can see y'all too. All right, so instead of using size 12 tapestry braid to get full coverage, that would just look like a big glob of thread. The better thing to do would be to use something like petite silk lame braid, which is a very thin thread, and you could use that, and you would be able to see each individual stitch in the unit, and you would still get the sparkle, but you would be able to see the dimension of the stitch. It wouldn't just look like a big mound of thread. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say it's better to use a lighter weight thread. You could use maybe a size 4 chronic braid. Something to keep in mind though, and I think I may have mentioned this in our last broadcast, was anytime you're doing a layered stitch, you want to make sure that the thread that you use is not, in my opinion, is not completely metallic, especially if you're doing something like a Smyrna cross stitch, because what ends up happening is that the light reflects off of the thread, off of the metallic thread, and you end up getting so much reflection from all of those individual stitches that are stacked on top of each other that you lose the definition of the stitches. So it doesn't even look like it would if you had executed that stitch in, say, a silk thread. So you just give it a try sometime. Try if you have some 4 chronic braid in your thread stash. Try working a Smyrna cross stitch in a pure metallic, like I don't know do it in gold. If you have gold's a pretty common color, so do it in gold, and then come back and work right next to it. Work a Smyrna cross stitch in, say, 2 strands of either gold DMC embroidery floss or gold Splendor, something like that, and see the difference between the two. You'll really be able to see the definition of the stitches so much better in the silk or the cotton than you can in the pure metallic because of the way the light reflects off the metallic, and it really, you lose the definition of each individual stitch. So that'd be a fun experiment for you to try. All right, so moving right along, we have one more, and this is the double straight cross stitch. I love, love, love this stitch. This is a great stitch to use for snowflakes and stars. It's beautiful. It too is, it's kind of backwards from the Smyrna Cross, and it's a little bit different in that the upright cross stitch is worked first, but it's also, the upright cross stitch is taller and wider than the standard cross stitch that's worked on top of that. So this makes, like I said, a really pretty star. If you had a canvas that had a lot of stars on it or snowflakes, it would be really, really pretty in that with that application too. So again, this would be another case where you would want to make sure that you used a lighter weight thread than you typically do because it is so many layers of stitches. And then you also want to make sure that if you used a thread, for example, if you wanted some twinkle or some sparkle, silk lame braid is a great option. Another possibility is to make your own. So if you had some cotton thread and maybe some blending filament, Accentuate is a really nice blending filament, so you could put some strands of Accentuate together with DMC cotton floss or with Splendor, a strandable silk. Then you could create your very own combination and get however much sparkle you want by either increasing or decreasing the number of strands of metallic blending filament that you put with it. But the fact that you have the softer thread or the thread that doesn't have the glitz to it, like this in the cotton or the silk, that gives you, you get the twinkle, but it doesn't overwhelm the whole stitch so that you don't see the individual stitches in the unit. So, all right, well, y'all, that's what I wanted to share with you today about using crossed stitches on your needlepoint projects. I hope you've enjoyed being here with me today. If you have any questions, always please reach out to us at help@serendipityneedleworks.com. It's a delight to be with you here every week, and I will see you again real soon. Don't forget tomorrow to check this, or on Thursday. This is being recorded on Wednesday. So anyway, the new blog post will go live on Thursdays over on the Serendipity Needleworks website, usually around noon. So, and if you get on the Serendipity Needleworks email list, then you'll get notifications about that sort of thing. So again, thanks for being here with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, happy stitching. Bye for now.